So with the UFC confirming they're heading back to London next year, Saturday the 22nd of March, these are 5 fights that have to take place on that card. So starting off, we've got Leon Edwards. Now, it doesn't really matter if he's the main or co-main event. He just has to be on this card. Leon Edwards, as we all know, is the former UFC welterweight champion. And the past 2 times the UFC have came to the UK, he has headlined both of them cards. He's currently out injured, but has said and has shown interest since the UFC have announced this card that he wants to be on it. And there's a fight taking place at the end of the year between Joaquin Buckley and Ian Gary, and I think whoever wins that matchup is the perfect opponent for Leon Edwards to make his return against. As you all know, Leon Edwards is currently ranked number 1 in the welterweight division. I think it's him versus Ian Gary. Now, if it is Ian Gary that beats Joaquin Buckley, which I am predicting, I do believe Ian Gary will not only beat Joaquin Buckley, I think Ian Gary's going to finish him. Now, Ian Gary is currently ranked number 7. As we all know, it's kind of like the in thing now to hate Ian Gary. Everybody hates him. I'm not really going to get into that. Obviously, he's coming off a big win over MVP in his last fight. Now, was that fight the most entertaining? Absolutely not. But Ian Gary showed fight IQ in there and showed that he can grapple as well and showed that he is willing to do whatever it takes to win. He is also currently undefeated in the UFC, and we know that him and Leon Edwards do have back and forth. Let's not forget, Ian Gary was kicked out of Leon Edwards' gym, and that was a big fiasco that was going on way back when it took place. Now Ian Gary's currently training out with Charles Oliveira. Now there are a bit of moving parts for this fight to happen. That is, Ian Gary has to beat Joaquin Buckley at the end of the year, which I think he will do, like I said. And I don't think March, near the end of March, is that quick of a turnaround, especially if Ian Gary is going to get the matchup against Leon Edwards, because if Ian Gary is able to beat Joaquin Buckley, then beat Leon Edwards, he's undeniable for a title shot. So I feel like that is the direction the UFC should go. If it is Ian Gary, I think Leon Edwards, Ian Gary will main event the card. If it's Joaquin Buckley, I think you do Leon Edwards, Joaquin Buckley as the co-main event. However, you could still have that as the main event, but that's the first fight I want to see. Leon Edwards versus the winner of Ian Gary versus Joaquin Buckley. Now, if it's Ian Gary or if it's Joaquin Buckley, in my opinion, Leon Edwards technically is probably one of the better fighters on the UFC's active roster, to be honest. I think this guy's extremely well-rounded, and whoever wins out of Joaquin Buckley and Ian Gary, I still think Leon Edwards beats the both of them, but that is the first fight I want to see on this next UK card. Next up, we've got another obvious name and face, and that is Paddy Pimblett. Now, we haven't seen Paddy since his last fight against Bobby Green, and that was on the last UK card. It feels like the UFC are now going to just wait out and have Paddy Pimblett fight on the next UK card in March. And I think Paddy Pimblett, now he is ranked in the UFC, there are a lot of options for him. Obviously, the most obvious one, and the one that everybody's calling for, is Money Moicano. That's why I'm saying this would probably end up main event in the card, to be honest, unless Leon Edwards fights Ian Gary. I feel like that's the only fight that would sway this from being the main event. And I think if they do Leon Edwards versus Ian Gary, they don't do this as the co-main event, because Paddy Pimblett versus Money Moicano is a massive fight. It could honestly end up being a co-main to a pay-per-view. It's that big. Both guys are big talkers, create a big name, big hype for themselves now in their last couple of fights. Moicano in his last 2, obviously he got hurt and dropped by Jalen Turner, but the way he was able to bounce back on a big card like UFC 300 and get the finish, and then what he done to Benoit Saint-Denis, just took him down, controlled him, and absolutely butchered the guy in the first round. I can't remember, was it stopped in the second round? Let me see. It was stopped after the second round. That's because Benoit Saint-Denis' face was just absolutely deformed. Money Moicano butchered him in there. And like I said, Paddy Pimblett is coming off that really impressive win over Bobby Green. Now, when that Bobby Green fight got announced, I actually thought Bobby Green was probably going to beat Paddy Pimblett because I was basing it off his performance against Jared Gordon. But Paddy Pimblett just showed how elite he is, especially on the mat. When this fight goes to the mat, it'll be interesting to see who comes out on top on Money Moicano or Paddy Pimblett. I feel like, though, this fight won't be wasted for a fight night, especially because there won't be any, what would you call it, any press conference, in the build-up. So this fight will be wasted because the build-up to Money Moicano versus Paddy Pimblett is just money. It's just absolutely money, and the UFC will know this. They know this is a big fight. Although it is an option. Another option that I think might make sense as well is Paddy Pimblett versus Beneil Dariush. Obviously, Beneil is ranked inside the top 8, I believe, right now in the UFC's lightweight division. He is coming off 2 back-to-back knockout defeats, but that they are two, Charles Oliveira and Arman Tsarukyan, who are two of the elite guys in the lightweight division. I feel like that there could maybe be the co-main event of this if you do Leon versus Ian Gary, Paddy Pimblett versus Beneil Dariush. It's still a big fight, especially if you are Paddy Pimblett. In terms of rankings, beating Beneil Dariush does more for you than beating Money Moicano. And I feel like maybe if Paddy had that fight, because I think he would beat Beneil Dariush. I think Beneil, I was a big fan of him. I thought he was very underrated, but I do think he's past it now. And I feel like Paddy Pimblett would probably chin him in there. And then that makes the fight between him and Moicano that much bigger, because they're that step closer to being in a title eliminator fight, or whatever you want to call it, because Pimblett then would be ranked near the top 5 if he was able to get the win, which I believe he would, over Beneil Dariush. But regardless, Paddy Pimblett he has to be on this card in my opinion. If they go the Money Moicano route, it might be the main event, but again, I don't think a fight night gives it the build it deserves. I think it should be on a pay-per-view, to be honest, and the UFC have announced the UK card is going to be a fight night only, so maybe you do Paddy Pimblett versus Beneil Dariush to build up to the Money Moicano Paddy Pimblett. I don't want to say mega fight, but it is going to be one of the bigger fights of the year when the UFC hosts that. But yeah, Paddy Pimblett, either Moicano or Beneil Dariush. Next up on the card, we've got another obvious one. Again, Lerone Murphy, since this card has been announced from the UK, has showed interest in it. Obviously, he's coming off that close fight with Dan Ige at UFC 308 now. People are trying to say Dan Ige won that fight. I thought Lerone Murphy, not clearly, but I was confident that he had won that fight 2-1 when it was going to the judges' scorecards. He's kind of like Leon Edwards in the way where he's just really well rounded, and he made a big call out after his fight against Dan Ige. He's now currently ranked just outside the top 10, and the fight that he called for, which fair play to him because he did get dropped by Dan Ige in that matchup, is probably outside of Topuria the biggest puncher in the division, and that is Josh Emmett. Now, we haven't seen Josh Emmett since UFC 296 where he folded Bryce Mitchell like an absolute deck chair. That was one of the most brutal knockouts I've ever seen in the UFC. He literally had Bryce Mitchell doing like the Harlem Shake on the floor. It was really, really brutal to see, but goes to show how much of a big puncher Josh Emmett is. And I think in terms of rankings, it makes sense. I do believe Lerone Murphy does deserve a jump up in competition. Dan Ige was a good step up for him, but now let's see, is Lerone Murphy really him? Give him Josh Emmett, the former interim title challenger in the featherweight division. He's faced some big names like Yair Rodriguez, Ilia Topuria. Obviously he's been in there with him. He went the distance with Ilia Topuria as well, let's not forget that. And look what Ilia Topuria has done to the likes of Alexander Volkanovski, the greatest UFC featherweight of all time, and Max Holloway, top 3 UFC featherweight of all time, in back-to-back fights. Lerone Murphy, Josh Emmett, that can be the feature fight of this card. Make it happen. Next up on the card, we've got MVP. Now, I'm probably reaching with this fight, and this probably will not happen, but I want to see MVP versus Wonderboy. I feel like now's the time to make that fight. Wonderboy obviously is coming off that knockout to Joaquin Buckley at UFC 307, so he might want to take a lot of time off. MVP is coming off that loss to Ian Gary at UFC 303. However, he did just compete in a grappling competition against Carlos Condit, so MVP is probably in the motion of looking to get back in there and get a fight sorted, and where better than to have him in the UK. He's a big name. He is ranked inside the top 15 of the UFC's welterweight division. Wonderboy is ranked inside the top 10 of the UFC's welterweight division. And Wonderboy, he has made it clear that he doesn't want to fight grapplers. He just wants to fight strikers. And I feel like MVP is the fight that everybody spoke about. MVP versus Wonderboy is the fight everybody spoke about when MVP signed to the UFC. Now, like Wonderboy had said in an interview when he was speaking about this, both guys do have that karate stance, so it could end up being a really boring fight. That's why I don't want to see it as the main event. I don't want to see it as the co-main event. But a main card opener, I mean, I think that's perfect. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, MVP. They're not really fighting for anything in particular. It's not a title eliminator bout. It's not a number one contender fight. It's not... There's nothing really to it. It's just two ranked guys near the bottom of the division having a fight that the fans really want to see. Now, this could be Wonderboy's last fight. Wonderboy is 41 years of age. He's definitely at the twilight of his career. I think this is the perfect time to make this fight. MVP's coming off a loss. Wonderboy's coming off 2 back-to-back losses. It's a good stylistic matchup for Wonderboy. It's very winnable. Wonderboy, let's not forget, is one of the best strikers we have ever seen in the UFC. He is deadly with that karate stance, and MVP has got such an unorthodox striking style. I think it's just a perfect matchup to open up the UFC UK card when it takes place in March. I do think, though, Wonderboy will get slapped, and maybe he knows this, and maybe that's why he's hesitant to take this fight, because that would be 2 back-to-back knockout defeats, but that would be 3 back-to-back finish defeats for Wonderboy Thompson. But I think it's the fight to make. Now or never, MVP, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, have that fight, open up the main card. And finally, to top off the card, since we're not going to get the heavyweight that is Tom Aspinall, give us the next best thing, which is Mick Parkin. The guy is currently 10-0 in the UFC. He last fought on the UFC 304 card in the UK. He's good mates with Tom Aspinall. Like I said, he is now ranked 10-0. I feel like you give him a jump up in competition. Waldo Cortez Acosta, I feel like that fight could make sense for him. Acosta is currently ranked number 14. Realistically, though, in the heavyweight rankings, I'd love to see Mick Parkin versus Derek Lewis. I feel like that there would be a great fight, but maybe with some of the fights I've already named, and I just don't see Derek Lewis coming over to the UK to fight Mick Parkin, if I'm being brutally honest. But I would like to see him on the card. Maybe the prelim headliner against Cortez Acosta, 2 ranked heavyweights, just on the outskirts of the top 10. I think you make it happen. I think that would be the perfect way to end the prelims, in my opinion. But yeah, those are the fights that I want to see for the UFC's return to London next year, the 22nd of March. Let me know your opinions in the comments below. And as always, like, share, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. And I'll see you again in the next one.